Hey everybody, this is Anisi. We are going to get started in a couple minutes when everybody gets in the room. If you would like to go ahead and put in the chat your name and where you're from. And let's also, just for funsies, let's put in the chat whether you have sent in your application for 24 funding yet. We're not funding is not going to be the number one thing that we talk about today. If we have time, we'll get to it. But just curious. Oh, I saw our first yes. Fantastic. Great. Another yes. I think I saw one from Indiana, one from Kansas. All right, the Midwest is representing. Oh, Contra Costa County, sweet. Oh no, Milton, folks who are still not still, it's not like it has been so long. Folks who are digging out from Milton, our hearts are definitely with you. Let's see, West Palm Beach. Fantastic. Oh, Alabama. Massachusetts. Leominster, right? I had a friend who was from that area, and I said something about Leominster, and she laughed me like under the table. It was hilarious. So I learned. Um, all right. So working on it. Not sure. Okay, that's a good question to find out. So folks are putting in the chat where you're from and whether or not you have submitted your application already. Cool. All right, so we will be talking about funding questions if we have time. The uh, the recording of the last office hours we sent this morning to be posted to the FSS resources page, and the recordings of the last two funding Q&A sessions we sent this morning to be posted to the FSS funding page. And maybe Eileen will be able to put into the chat the link for the FSS funding page. And the FSS resources page as well. Those are should be on your speed dial, your favorites, whatever. But before we get into any of that, we are going to start actually with Libby Fernandez from the multifamily office. And she is going to be starting with some very exciting news. So Libby, take it away.
Yes, it was certainly exciting for us, maybe less so for folks that are going to be filling out an Excel spreadsheet. But we are able to have you submit your your calendar year 2023 annual reports for multifamily properties. The reason why this is so important is because this is, helping to establish your history of how many participants you've been serving, which is going to be important down the road for renewals. And so the reports will be due on November 15th. You will submit using the multifamily reporting tool Excel spreadsheet, which is available on the FSS resources page. And it should be submitted to the incoming box for your multifamily region, the same one that you use for all of your other servicing items for your property. So again, the deadline will be November 15th. It should be sent using the reporting tool to the incoming box for your region. Now, this is only for properties that had FSS programs in calendar year 2023. So if you just started your FSS program in 2024, then this does not apply to you. If you had a program in 2023, then you'll need to submit by November 15th. We're going to be sending out an email to all of you tomorrow, so you get kind of your official notification. As I said, though, if if you've just started your FSS program, you can ignore it. This is only for folks who had FSS programs in 2023. The reason why we're sending it to everyone, even though we know that some of you have just started your programs, is that this applies to both funded and unfunded FSS programs for multifamily. So I actually don't know if let's say you had an unfunded FSS program at your multifamily property before you got your grant, you will still need to submit a report. And so just to make sure that we reach everybody that had a program in 2023, we're sending it out to everybody. But again, so it will be using the FSS reporting tool found on the FSS resources page. Due November 15th, your notification email will be arriving tomorrow to your AORs of record. And if you have any questions, please email mf_FSS@hud.gov. I see a question.
Awesome.
Let's see if we
Yes, go ahead.
choose programs that are covered by multiple AEs. So do we send them to the AEs or to the main email? So as with other servicing items, please always send items to the incoming box. If you have had a change of account executive, or like let's say your account executive has just gone out on extended medical leave, it's really important that you are sending servicing items to your incoming box, not directly to your account executive's email, because otherwise it could just be sitting there and their branch chief would have no way of knowing that you are waiting for a response to an email if they've gone out on extended medical leave. So please always send items to the incoming boxes, not directly to your account executives. That is how we log items and make sure that they get sent to a staff person who can respond. And if you do have joint programs, be sure that you're submitting reports for each property, just like you need to do your escrow separately. With each property has its own books, its own accounting, submits its own ORQ adjustments for your escrows. You also need to submit separate reports so that your account executive can save those and so that they're available in the event of an audit. So we do need separate reports. Otherwise, you don't want to wind up having a problem on your next audit if you aren't able to produce your annual reports for your FSS program.
There is a question that's in the chat. Do you want to look at that, Libby?
Oh yeah, sorry. I've only
Please
been
put
looking
the
at the Q&A.
questions in the Q&A, not
Yeah.
in the chat.
Since the report is only for programs operated in calendar year 2023, does that mean that the data included should be through 12/31/2023? Good question. And yes, that is correct. It's for the calendar year is the reporting period. So it should be January 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2023. And you'll get instructions on reporting for 2024 when those reports are due next year.
Okay, there are a couple of other questions in the Q&A.
Let's see.
You'll
Yes. So there's a question about if our software has reports coming directly out of a database and are all combined, do we need to separate them out by property? Yes. Again, it's really important for audit purposes that you are able to connect every escrow with a resident, right? So your property needs to be separately tracking which residents are participating in FSS, needs to be separately tracking who is having ORQ vouchers submitted for them, and needs to have a separate annual report with information that's submitted to your account executive so that your account executive for that property knows that you are complying with the regulations. Because again, we're the reason for the annual report is that it is required in the FSS regulations. And it is important also in the event that, let's say that you currently have a joint program and later on down the line that changes and you are taking one of the grantee joint applicants off, you need to have a record of how many residents have been served at each property so that you can demonstrate that you're still eligible for a renewal, that you have enough residents to support that number of coordinators. Let's see. I think that's I think that's all that I see related to the multifamily reports. Again, you can
Okay.
also send questions to mf_fss@hud.gov if you have any questions or run into trouble as you're filling out your report. So I guess that's it.
Great. Awesome. All right. So if folks have questions that are not related to funding, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We will try to take those first. I see there are some funding related questions in the Q&A as well already. I'll just go ahead and note that we have, weekly Q&A sessions for funding specifically, and the next one is going to be tomorrow at 2:00. You can find the registrations for those on the FSS funding page. There will be one modification. The session for not this week, but next week is actually at 1:00, not at 2:00 as it's listed. And so that will be, let me just make sure here. On Thursday, the 24th, at from 1 to 2 will be the session for the week of the 21st. So, and all the other ones are on Tuesdays or I guess the one after that is Tuesday at 2:00. This week's is on Wednesday, clearly, because we're here on Tuesday. Okay, great. Thank you, Eileen, for posting that registration. I see that there is a question that someone has posted in the chat that is not a question for HUD, it's a question for other FSS coordinators, which is great. Please feel free to read that and respond there as we keep going. All right, let's see what else has come in. Let's see. We love to see your hellos, but feel free to put those in the chat, not the Q&A. Oh wait, here's another question on the report, Libby. The FSS program hired a coordinator in October of 23, enrolled the first participant in December of 23, but the COP was official on January 1st, 24. So we would not have anything to report for the 23 report. Is that correct?
I would say you can submit a report. Your account executive may, because I mean, of course, they will know that you have an action plan, and they may be wondering if you had enrolled folks. So you may want to just submit a report, or at least send an email saying like, hey, we didn't actually have anyone start, but this is their enrollment date, because I do believe, let me double check, like on the report itself, but at a minimum I would suggest strongly letting your account executive know that you did start your program, but didn't have any active COPs until January of the following year. But let me just check what's in the reporting tool and make sure that, because that is a good question.
Great. There's a technical question here about when following the link for the FSS office hours, there's a delay, and by the time Zoom allows me to join the meeting, you folks have already begun. So the problem here, or the issue here, is that these meetings regularly have 300, 400, 500 people. So the literal time it takes for that many people to enter a room is sometimes up to a minute. So usually we try to find the balance between not talking until most of the people have entered the room and people who have entered the room freaking out because they can't hear anybody talking. So sometimes we'll just start talking. That's kind of why we do the like, hey, everybody, put your hello in the chat. And so, we kind of wait for a couple minutes of non-critical chatting so that everybody can get in the room. So you really haven't missed anything, but it's probably just that you were, maybe number 300 to get to click the link. And so when the producer lets everybody in the room, it takes a minute to get everybody in there. So you really haven't missed anything. Let's see. Can you put mainstream voucher holders on FSS? Yes. So if it's a special purpose voucher, and mainstream voucher holders are eligible for FSS. Just remember that in order to be an FSS, you have to be willing and able to work. Whatever suitable employment looks like for you is fine. But we have had a couple of questions come up recently about, well, can't you just do a reasonable accommodation for 0 hours? And the answer is no, you can't. The family has to be able to work at whatever suitable employment looks like, and 0 hours is not suitable employment. So now we have, I think last time we checked, which might be a couple of years ago, but there were maybe 15% of the people who are on FSS are families where the head of household has a disability. Now I think we checked that, maybe it was actually before the final rule when it was only the official head of household who could enroll. But in any case, lots of people who have disabilities clearly can work and can and do work. And so we want to include all of those folks, but just that note, since you asked about mainstream vouchers, is that yeah, folks who are not interested in working or not able to work at all are not good fits for FSS.
And I did confirm the reporting tool does not ask about the date that the COP was signed, only about the effective date. So yeah, I guess technically speaking, you wouldn't have any participants. But your FSS program had started, right? I mean, you had a coordinator who was doing outreach. You were operating an FSS program, you just didn't have anyone whose COP had started yet. So yeah, I would submit the report. I mean, it's going to be blank, I guess, but at least to let your account executive know that you had started your program near the end of 2023. You just didn't have any participants whose COPs had started yet.
Great. So it looks like there's a couple of questions about that answer I just gave about people with disabilities not being able to enroll in FSS. So again, suitable employment is whatever you determine with that person's, if they're on SSI and they can only work a certain number of hours before affecting their benefits, absolutely don't require them to work more than those hours. Working with their healthcare providers or perhaps a vocational trainer, or it may suitable employment maybe can only work from home, can only, is self-employed, making and selling crafts on Etsy. It's 10 hours a week as a greeter at Walmart. It's, those kind of things. I know that there's housing authority, I believe it's Fargo Housing Authority, that has an Air Force base that's really near them, where they have actually a whole program. They hire people with all kinds of disabilities on the base, and they've had a lot of success working with families with disabilities. So there's lots of ways to do it. Part-time can definitely be, there's a question here about, can they work part-time? Yes, that can definitely be suitable employment if that is what the person needs. And that's also considering it doesn't just have to be a physical disability or a developmental disability. It could be mental health, and maybe someone just knows that or maybe they've got a chronic illness and they have fatigue and they can't work 40 hours a week. And but they can do 15 or 20. So but the point is, when you do the ITSP, you set what that suitable employment is and what that goal looks like. And the way that it can be implemented without being discriminatory is that FSS is not a supportive services program just generally. It's an earnings and employment program. So that's what the program is for. The requirement is that the final goal is to be suitably employed. Right. So if the family or the person who is the FSS head of household, and again, that could be any adult in the household, but if the person who is the FSS head of household cannot work at all, they cannot meet the requirements of the program and therefore should not be enrolled in the program. You should, however, have referrals for them for other resources in your community. And that's something that your PCC can help you with as well. So you should probably have, a standard protocol. If someone comes to you and says, I'm interested in FSS, but I cannot work at all, where can you send them so that they could get the other resources that they might need, that they might actually be looking for? Also, those of you who have a homeownership program and make it a requirement that the family is an FSS in order to access your homeownership program, that is a homeownership policy, not an FSS policy. And I highly, highly, strongly recommend that you have some sort of a alternative policy for families who cannot work and therefore are not going to be in the FSS program. Because families, people with disabilities buy homes based on just their SSDI or and any other sources of income. It is entirely possible in some cases. And so it is not a best practice to require that all of your homeownership families are also in FSS. So yeah, just something to consider there. Let me make sure I've answered all of these questions. So families can enroll. Gina, families can enroll if they have Social Security or SSDI. There's no ban on that enrollment. As long as they can and are willing to work towards working whatever number of hours they can work without losing their benefits. So there is no ban on families with Social Security or Social Security disability. So I don't know what this means about that you had to add them because you are quote unquote fair housing. Because that's there's no fair housing requirements about enrolling someone in FSS. It's an earnings and employment program. Anyone who is willing and able to work at whatever level suitable employment is determined for them should be able to enroll in the FSS program. But people who are not willing or able to work are not good candidates for the FSS program and should be given alternative resources. Hopefully that answers that question. So do they need to prove the need for part-time? So this is when you work with the family directly, you work with their benefits providers, you might work with their doctor, you might work with other outside folks that they're working with to make a determination at your local level about what suitable employment looks like for them. So I have a senior on FSS who's not going to work, but I was told I can't refuse her participation. Not that I wanted to, but I could work with her to overcome barriers using the social services coordinator role of my job. So if you are funded 100% from the FSS grant, then 100% of your job is the FSS program. And so this would not be somebody who would enroll in the FSS program because they are not willing or able to work. But again, referring them to other resources would be the way to go. And those other resources could come from the folks that you have in your PCC or other folks. Um, I was told that it automatically disqualifies them if they receive disability. So you're saying that they are not. So that is correct. Receiving disability does not disqualify a family from enrolling in FSS. If they can obtain suitable employment part-time, can they enroll even if they receive SSI? Yes, absolutely. Yes, the Ross program would be a great alternative resource for families like this, especially if the Ross program had decided to target seniors. In fact, a lot of PHAs who get both FSS and Ross do target seniors and youth because those are not the targets of FSS, and that's the way they kind of split up between Ross and FSS. So yeah, I think I answered this questions a couple of times now. Should you define suitable employment in your action plan? No, you can define the way that you will determine suitable employment for each family in your action plan, but suitable employment is determined on a case-by-case basis, person by person. But it should be written into the COP final goal for seek and maintain suitable employment, what suitable employment is for that family. You could, if you wanted to, in your FSS action plan, say, you know, generally for quote unquote work able families, and you may want to define that. You know, we will recommend that, you know, 40 hours a week is suitable employment, but again, it has to be determined for each family and should be documented in their COP. Um, okay. When FSS participants graduate from the program and they receive their funds, is it taxable? The answer is no, it is not taxable. There is a letter from the IRS. It's a very old letter, but there is an IRS letter on our FSS resources page that explains that it is not taxable. Does it need to be reported to housing? I assume that that means to like the housing side of your agency. And the answer is this is really one of those places, I guess it can be an internal policy, but it does become an asset if they keep it as an asset, and it would be treated like if they just put it in the bank, it becomes an asset. But otherwise, I mean, they can use it for whatever they want. It doesn't like count as income in terms of like, you know, determination of what their portion of the rent would be. If they are transitioning to SSI, SSDI, do they need to report their funds to Social Security? That one I'm not touching with a 10-foot pole. That would be a question for Social Security. This is a great reason to have somebody from SSI and SSDI on your PCC. But again, if they put it in the bank, it does become an asset. There's no exceptions for that. Okay. I don't let's see. If a person becomes disabled while in the FSS program and recently had earnings and was escrowing, would they no longer qualify for graduation if they're not able to work entirely? So this is where, under the new contract of participation, since the final rule, there is a provision for termination with escrow disbursement. And there are a couple reasons why you might have a termination with escrow disbursement. And those are if a family is porting for good cause. That does not apply to multifamily, but on the FSS side, it would. And also if the family has become disabled. So this particular question, someone's working, they had started to escrow, they were doing well, they become disabled. Maybe they had an accident, maybe they had degenerative illness and they were able to work for a while, and then over time now they're not able to work entirely. Those would be reasons to do a termination with escrow disbursement. So they wouldn't graduate because they aren't working, but they could end their contract of participation and still get their escrow money through that termination with escrow disbursement. Really, really, really encourage you all to read the regulations. Everybody should have taken the mandatory, at least one person from each agency should have taken the mandatory training that we put out on HUD Exchange starting at the end of April. We go over this there too. And if you are a newer FSS coordinator, and you're sort of like, I don't know what any of this is talking about, I would encourage you to include funds for training as part of your stipend in funding. I know we're not getting to funding yet, but in your funding request, and I would really strongly encourage you to go to an FSS basics or an FSS regulations class at some place like NAMK or NARO, or there's a whole bunch of other ones, because that's a pretty basic and important question. So being off government assistance, does that include food benefits or just cash and TANF? So that only includes TANF or whatever it's called in your state. You can still get SNAP or food stamps. You can still get Medicaid. You can still get like all sorts of other assistance. It's talking about cash assistance that you have to be off of. The whole family has to be off of. Let's see. Let's see. I was hired in November of 23. I've not received proper training. I've been submitting requests for training, but due to them being out of state, the agency is denying their request, although the funds are there. I'm the only FSS coordinator and do both FSS and Ross full-time. Is there something I can do to be in compliance? Yeah, that's a really, really big problem. First of all, FSS coordinators who are being paid 100% of their salary through the FSS grant should not be working on Ross. They should be doing only FSS. And in this case, I would just recommend, invite you to send a message to the FSS mailbox, fss@hud.gov. Repeat this question, tell us what your agency is. We can have the field office look into it, because not every agency has training dollars or asked for training dollars in their last funding request. But if there are training dollars there, hopefully they would allow you to use them to get trained. But the thing I'm most concerned about is this, that you're doing Ross and FSS full-time, because that is not allowed. Let's see. Oh, here. So can seniors under the HCV program receive assistance from Ross? So that's a good question. The answer is no, unfortunately. I'm sorry. The Ross program is only for people in public housing. So folks that are running an FSS program in the voucher side would need to look for other resources for seniors in your area potentially to be referred to. Once a participant reaches fair market rate, is this an immediate graduation? No. So under the old regulations, there was something called the 30% rule, that said that, well, I'm not even gonna go into it. The point is it's gone. So the answer is no. If once a family incomes out of the rental assistance program that they're in, they are automatically off of the FSS program, but it is not automatically a graduation. So if you're working with folks in the HCV program, there is 180 days of what's called zero HAP. Other PHAs call it something differently, but basically where the family is paying the entire amount of the rent. And they have 180 days on this status before their voucher ends. So when somebody moves to zero HAP, you know that 180-day clock is starting to tick. You need to be working with that family immediately to review their ITSP and their contract of participation and see, have they met all of their goals? Can they meet all of their goals in the next 180 days? If not, can you modify their goals so that they can graduate successfully? This is one of the reasons why it's always a good idea, a best practice, to allow for goal modifications right up until the end of the contract of participation. So if usually what tips them into the zero HAP is that their income has reached 80% of area median income, which would make them stop escrowing as well. But it's not always exactly the same. There's lots of sort of just technicalities where it might not be at the same time. So once they reach that zero HAP, you want to see if they're still escrowing or if the escrow needs to stop. But they can still receive services and they can still work towards graduation during that 180 days. So one thing to think about is that it does happen fairly often that someone starts that 180 days, whatever income they or new employment they received that tipped them over into that zero HAP. They may not keep the job, or childcare or transportation plans fall through, whatever. So they fall back out of that 180 days. So you just want to be keeping a very, very close eye on those families that are in that situation. But no, there's actually nothing now that would result in an automatic graduation. The end of the rental assistance will result in an automatic termination, though. So that's why you want to be helping those families to graduate before their rental assistance terminates. Now, that 180 days of zero HAP does not apply on the multifamily side. So, Libby, I know we've had some questions about that in the past. Can you say anything about how that works with the when someone becomes over income on the multifamily side?
I mean, without getting too deep into it, because we have, some differences between in how this works on the multifamily side. But basically, the same rules for whether someone is an eligible PBRA resident still apply. Um, and so if they would ordinarily at this income no longer be eligible for rental assistance, then the same threshold and the same process applies. One kind of special note, though, sometimes after someone is no longer receiving rental assistance, right? You're no longer vouchering for that person. Um, they may still have a Section 8 lease, but that doesn't mean that they're receiving rental assistance, right? It's just that we don't require you to switch them over to a different lease when they're no longer a PBR resident. You can still continue using the same lease, but that doesn't mean that they're receiving rental assistance. So they have to actually be receiving subsidy from HUD to be a PBRA resident. And once they're no longer a PBRA resident, they can no longer participate in FSS.
Great, thank you. All right. There's some great questions in here. Let's see. Yes. So the third reason why you might do something called termination with escrow disbursement is if the services that they need in order to reach their goals are not available. That's really, really rare. Although I have a question here about one of you that is in the midst of the destruction from Helene or Milton, and it's having effects on available services. So yes, if someone was in the FSS program and on a contract of participation, and I suppose if they are like very close to graduation and you can't do an extension, but they don't have the services available to meet their goals, you could either eliminate those goals, or you could do a termination with escrow disbursement. I would also just mention, in cases like this, where, you know, there's emergency, this might be a reasonable, like, don't exit them from the program as a reason to, like, to be able to get to their escrow. Um, think about doing an interim escrow disbursement and staying in the program if possible, if that would work for them, because I think, you know, an emergency response, um, I'm sure they have some goal about working or getting to work, or you know, things like that, where an emergency response or in a response to an emergency would probably be, you know, towards one of their goals, and could do an interim disbursement instead of exiting from the program, unless that's what they want, or they're right at the very end of their the time period in the COP, and they simply can't get the resources that they need in order to complete a goal. There is never a reason. I get this question a lot, and it's really confusing. There's never a reason that you would give a portion of the escrow, except that when a family graduates, if they owe money to the housing authority or owner, that's taken out before the escrow is given to them. But there's never like a proration of the escrow that is dispersed upon graduation or upon termination with escrow disbursement. It's always everything that's in there, except for that one caveat, is of if they owe money. Um, let's see. Um, cash assistance does not apply to adopted children or court-ordered custody cases, correct? The answer to that is that there used to be a notice that said that specifically referenced child-only welfare grants. So that is in the case of things like kinship care. That was incorporated into the final rule. So the answer is, like, without knowing exactly what kind of cash assistance you're talking about, there is a carve out for a family that's receiving a child-only welfare assistance, because they are taking care of a kid that is not that there's a custody or kinship care situation going on. The reason I'm hedging right now is that I don't know if it specifically affects adopted children, because I believe that adopted children like have a different type of assistance, and I don't know all the details to that, but I would go back to the regulation. It's under the definition of welfare assistance. If you can't find it, you can send a message to the FSS mailbox about how it's specifically worded. Is there HUD funding available for FSS activities over and beyond the grant funding for salaries? No, there is not. So they can stay now in FSS when it's 0 HAP and TTP is higher than FMR. Yes, they can stay for the 180 days of 0 HAP. The rule about when the TTP was higher than FMR was eliminated with the final rule. Let's see. Could we have the questions and answers that were articulated and replied to compiled to an FAQ sheet for those of us who may have risked the response? So actually there is an FAQ. We're going to talk about the FAQ on funding, but there's also already about a 30-page FAQ that goes over a lot of these answers that is on the FSS resources page. So please make sure that you have read that, and have, you don't have to memorize it, but just have some familiarity with that. I'm sorry, did you say they cannot draw escrow during the 0 HAP status? No, I did not say that. There's no change in whatever your policies are on interim escrow disbursements during the 0 HAP status. If someone purchases a home and is now a homeowner but is not employed, could they graduate the program? No, they must be suitably employed. Um, let's see. Sarah, I asked you the question, what is TWD? And you gave me the answer, which is termination with disbursements. And now I lost the question. If you could ask the whole question again, I'll try to get to it. Sorry about that. Can I still enroll a tenant if they're paying close to the market rate rent? This is for a PBRA, or multifamily property. So I think the answer is yes, you can still enroll them, but once they hit that market rate rent,
Yeah, I
that will
mean, you
end
can,
their participation in the program.
yeah, I mean, you certainly you can still enroll them. I mean, I think that, if they expect that their income is going to rise above the level where they're no longer to be receiving assistance, it might be fair to warn them that that will happen before they enroll. But, who knows how long it may be before they actually do income out. It could be months, could be a year, so they could still get the benefit of the FSS program during that time.
Yep.
They may not escrow much, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't benefit from the case management while they are still a PBRA resident.
Thanks. Is interest accumulated paid with the escrow funds if a participant reaches zero HAP and the funds are paid months after the zero HAP date? So the interest accumulated is always paid with the escrow. I don't know what the difference would be about when the escrow is paid out. Oh, but if the question is like they stop accumulating escrow, do they still accumulate interest? The answer is yes. I think that might be the question. If they are terminated with escrow, do we give them all the escrow or a portion? All of it. There's never really a situation where you would give them only a portion of the escrow. If someone is no longer escrowing due to exceeding the low income limit, so they've exceeded 80% of AMI, would they still qualify for termination with escrow? So how much they make does not affect whether or not they qualify for termination with escrow distribution. So they're the three reasons. The one, the services they need are not available, which is very rare. They are porting for good cause, or they have become permanently disabled and cannot work. So those would be the three reasons that you could grant the termination with escrow disbursement. And it doesn't matter whether they're currently escrowing or not. How is termination with disbursement noted on the 5.8? This is a great question. On the current 5.8, it's not there. So it would still be noted as a termination, unfortunately. But on the new 5.8, whenever HIP gets into place, there will be a place where you can note there'll be an it'll be graduation, termination, or termination with escrow disbursement. And we are talking about possibly allowing for those termination with escrow disbursements to count as graduations in the FAM score. We haven't gotten there yet, but on the new 5.8, there will be a way to mark that separately, but there is not right now. It's great question. Based on HUD regulation, if a participant owes the housing authority, they can still graduate, just the amount they owe will be deducted. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Let's see. I thought I read residents can borrow from their escrow for car repairs. Are you saying they can only receive monies upon graduation? No, I'm not saying that. It is a policy at every individual FSS program that is in your FSS action plan, whether a FSS participant can do interim disbursements from their escrow, and for what reasons. So it's a local decision. It's a best practice to allow for interim disbursements. And then car repairs is a very common thing that you might allow an interim disbursement for. Let's see, other non-funding questions. When someone graduates and you're dispersing escrow, is there a time limit on how quickly we have to provide them with the disbursement? That's interesting. This has been coming up lately. So there's no regulatory time limit that says you must give them their escrow within 30 days, but be reasonable. I heard of a situation recently where a PHA was holding all of the escrow disbursements until they could do a graduation once a year. And that's not a good idea. The families have completed their requirements, they have graduated. Give them the escrow now and invite them back for a celebration when it's time. So, there's no regulation about how quickly it needs to be done. But I mean, just imagine, like, you've entered into a program in good faith, you've done all the things that are required, and now you're expecting that you will receive this reward at the end. And they say, all right, we'll give it to you in 6 months. Why? um, sometimes larger housing authorities just take longer to get things through their processes. We know that, but it should be in a reasonable amount of time. I mean, sort of think about the reasonable, as an old deputy assistant secretary of ours used to say, the man on the street, right? The person on the street, what feels like that would be reasonable. Waiting for a year is not reasonable. Let's see. Okay. This going back to the people with disabilities, I guess I have a participant who's unable to work because doing so would result in the loss of her medical insurance. That's interesting. I wonder if that means like Medicaid. Are there solutions that would allow her to work without jeopardizing her medical coverage? So I would do some research here, talk to her caseworker for whatever that medical coverage is. Usually there's a limit, right? There's an income limit, and she can make up to a certain amount. That would be what would qualify as suitable employment, whatever under that certain amount would be. It's very rare that you can't work at all, but I would investigate that. I have a participant who's voluntarily leaving Section 8 to go live with an elderly father that needs her care. She has met all the goals but one. She is employed and not receiving assistance. May I graduate and award escrow? So this is the place where you need to find out what your local policies are on goal changes. And this is one of the reasons that we strongly recommend, as a best practice, to allow goal changes right up until the end of the COP. Because this would be a situation where you'd probably say, hey, this person has been acting in good faith. They've done all the things that they had planned to do, except for this one, and now they have this need, because life changes in 5 to 7 years, right? In this case, I would probably say, let's eliminate, as long as your policies allow for it, let's eliminate that last goal that they haven't completed and let them graduate before they leave housing. Is workers' comp counted as earned income? So the workers' comp that someone would get sort of monthly in lieu of a salary is counted as earned income. But if someone, say, gets a lump sum, like from an insurance payout, that is not counted as earned income. We have a little grid on some draft FAQs. If you want to send this question to the FSS mailbox, I can send that to you, but that's basically the answer. So if an FSS participant becomes over income and their monthly subsidy ends, is their FSS considered complete? Is this an immediate graduation? There is no case for immediate graduation. That would be the case where you would want to make sure that you have worked with them to address any outstanding goals and get them ready to graduate or graduate them before they reach the end of that 180 days zero HAP period. Let's see. Okay, so I think I've answered this question several times, so I'm going to move on to other questions. Are there different reporting requirements for moving to work agencies and PHAs that are not part of moving to work? The difference is that moving to work agencies use the 50058 MTW form or 50058 MTW expansion form once HIP comes online, as opposed to the standard 50058. And that's it. Can we talk about allowing expenses under forfeited accounts? Can they be used to pay for FSS coordinator training? Can they be used to help an FSS family with rent if the family is in good standing? So the answer is there are a couple of regulations around what is allowable, and beyond that, what you're going to use your forfeited escrow pot for has to be set out in your FSS action plan. Using it for coordinator training is an allowable expense. However, when that regulation or when that statute was written, we had not included a training stipend or training funds as part of fringe benefits. So we highly encourage you to ask for what you need in terms of fringe benefits for training your coordinator in your funding application, and use that money to train your coordinator and not the money in the forfeited escrow account. Because the money in the forfeited escrow account is intended to be used for families in good standing. And that can look like a lot of different things. Mostly, like, the intent was really to be used as a fund for barrier removal for families that needed it for, things in order to get to work. So car repair might be one. I need boots, I need tools, I need a uniform, I need test fees. I need to take a driver's ed class. I need to, pay the fee for a driver's license. All those kind of things are what it was really intended for. And so you should have those policies kind of in your FSS action plan. One of the things that I am getting a lot of questions about folks who seem to be really kind of like locking it down and sort of gatekeeping those funds. And I just want to remind folks that there is no rule that they all have to be expended within a year. Somehow some folks got that idea. That's not the case. But conversely, there's also no gold ribbons if you have money in that pot, right? The money is there to be used for the benefit of FSS families. So now it's been 2 years almost since we implemented the final rule. And maybe about 1 year since everybody's FSS action plans have been reapproved. So take a look and see how much is in that forfeited account. Are you using it to its greatest and best use? If not, review your policies and think about other ways that would be better to use it. Let's see. Is an FSS coordinator allowed to do portability, interviewer/investigator, which is annuals, interims, unit transfers, and move out and ins, and pick errors? So Um, an FSS coordinator must use 100% of their time working on FSS activities. Some PHAs find it beneficial for the FSS coordinator to also do some of the standard housing functions, like was just mentioned, for FSS participants. If that is something that your housing authority or agency wants to do, you need to get approval from your field office or grant specialist and you need to be able to show that it is to the benefit of the program to do it that way. There's a lot of debate on both sides. Some folks say I'd rather be the one stop and the only person who ever touches all of the pieces of things that my FSS families are going through. Others say I have so much work to do with just the FSS side of things. I don't have time or experience or expertise to be able to do recertifications and things like that. So really depends on your local situation, probably how big your caseloads are, how well coordinated your housing side is with your FSS side, things like that. So it's an individual decision, but in no way can you ever do those activities for people who are not in FSS. And do not be sneaky and say, oh, well, we're going to do the housing activities for people who might be in FSS and have the FSS coordinator do those. No, sorry. Can't do that. You can if with the approval of your field office, you can do them for families that are already in the FSS program. Okay. All right, I think we might be almost through with all of our non-funding questions. Is escrow growth stopped when the family pays for full rent or when they make a certain level of income? Yes. Families stop earning escrow when they reach 80% of area median income. So, yep. If we graduated participant and they received escrow disbursement, but later determined there was more escrow gained, should the housing authority pay that participant that escrow? Yes. If you made a mistake, fix it. So this question of, so they don't continue to get money dispersed into their escrow account while on zero HAP. So I'm going to be really, really clear. Zero HAP does not always equal 80% of AMI. You need to do those calculations separately. Often it does, but not always. So I'm going to answer the question. If the family reaches 80% of AMI and they no longer receive escrow deposits each month, do they still continue to receive interest? The answer is yes. The answer to that question is yes. Let's see. If the participant gets evicted through the court from their unit for non-payment and the PHA terminates the voucher, will they forfeit the escrow automatically? Yes. If they get evicted and you have not worked with the family to figure out if they're eligible to graduate and graduate them before they get evicted, once rental assistance ceases, the FSS contract ceases. And if they haven't graduated, they are terminated. However, evictions take a long time to happen. So I would make sure that you have some sort of a system where you are notified if any of your FSS participants are starting the process of eviction, and you want to work with them, really quickly, hopefully to stop the eviction, but also if it looks like that's not going to happen, if they can graduate them. At the time of employment, we have the initial income baseline. When there's a change, such as an interim, this baseline changes in our software system. My question is, should this baseline change? Absolutely not. That's why it's a baseline. It doesn't change. So yeah, that's a problem. If we have a participant that is not elected to sign the new COP and is at 0 HAP, may they graduate immediately regardless of goal completion? No. So if they're under the old COP from before the final rule, there was a regulation in place that said if the family's earned income is greater than or equal to 30% of, or sorry, if 30% of the family's income is greater or equal to the FMR for the unit to which the family is entitled, then they graduate immediately. That only applied to vouchers, not to public housing. And it is not the same as 0 HAP. So if they're still under the old COP and all of those provisions apply, then they would graduate immediately. But that's the only time and situation when that would happen. If a client is terminated from the HCB program and FSS, can those forfeited escrow funds be used to pay their unpaid repayment agreement to the housing agency? No. If they are forfeited, you cannot use that money to settle any debts to the housing authority, only if they graduate. Are public housing Ross participants counted in CMAP? Well, first of all, Ross only serves public housing and CMAP is only for vouchers. So no. And also indicator 14 in CMAP is about only PHAs that continue to have a mandatory program. But CMAP is only about vouchers, so it only looks at the old HCV mandatory program. So there's a lot going on in this question, but the overall answer is no, no, and no. Somebody asked a question earlier about mandatory programs. This is fairly unusual. If you want to know if your program still has a mandatory slots, you can send a note to the FSS mailbox, copy your field office, and I can show you what we have on our calculations. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, this only applies to PHAs, not to multifamily, and the gist of it is between 1990, when the FSS program was first authorized, in 1998, there was a requirement that for every new public housing unit or voucher increment that a PHA got, they had to add one slot to their mandatory FSS program. It didn't have to be in that unit, but they had to build a program to that size. Then starting in 1998, every graduation from the program resulted in the diminishment by one of the mandatory program size. Long story short, we've done a horrible job tracking this. The only place we track it is in CMAP indicator 14, and that tracking has been sort of abominable through time. A couple years ago, we've done our best to sort of recreate a history and then pull data from PIC on graduations to have a better understanding of what those mandatory slots still are. And again, the only place where we look at that is in CMAP. But also, I just want to mention that in the 2025 budget, the president's budget, we proposed a legislative proposal that would eliminate the mandate that were still for any of those that were still left. We have to wait to see if Congress approves it, but we haven't gotten any questions or pushback on it. So we're very hopeful that that will be approved, in which case that will be eliminated. Also, there has been a new version of CMAP that has gone out for public comment. And in that, CMAP indicator 14, specifically about FSS, has been eliminated, and it's been replaced with a family success metric that's much broader. So yeah, so questions on mandatory slots, happy to answer them for your specific agency in the mailbox, but just know that we are moving towards eliminating that mandate generally. Um, okay. So team, um, are there any other non-funding questions that I'm missing? Oh, how do we implement a homeownership program? I don't really know. There's a whole other office in HUD on home ownership and home ownership counseling, so I would start looking at that. But I know that both the person and the agency have to be certified by HUD. Um, but I am not an expert on that, so I'm sorry I can't answer that question. Um, okay. Can I enroll a client who's under the RAD program? So this is a question that we get a lot, and there's a lot of confusion around this. RAD itself is not actually a rental assistance program. It is a method by which PHAs can transition public housing to either project-based vouchers or project-based rental assistance. Project-based vouchers are still under public and Indian housing. They are managed by a housing authority generally, and generally, if you've done RAD to PBV, there's no change. The families, those are still voucher families. You treat them just like vouchers. If you do RAD and now they are PBRA, the PBRA owner is required to continue serving any FSS families that were in public housing before their rental assistance was transitioned to PBRA. So they have to set up an FSS action plan, and they may either run the FSS program themselves or form a cooperative agreement with the housing authority or another housing authority if they wanted to have those people with COPs served. It is up to the PBRA owner whether they want to continue to have an FSS program after they've met that requirement of serving the folks who were in it before. Um, and in that case, also they can run it themselves or they can do it under a cooperative agreement. A housing authority that has an FSS program may reach out to a nearby multifamily owner and say, hey, do you want to enroll your multifamily families in our FSS program? You would need to have a cooperative agreement in order to do that. And then the multifamily owner would be responsible for tracking all the escrow and doing all the reporting on the multifamily side. And the housing authority would be responsible for doing all of the like coaching and case management. And that would be spelled out in the cooperative agreement. So long answer to this question, because I'm not sure sort of which way you're going, but that's when you're thinking about RAD, remember that the fundamental question is RAD to PBV or RAD to PBRA. Let's see. How often should you be meeting with participants? I've been told quarterly and annually. So what I really recommend is that you have some sort of a triage system at your housing authority that helps determine how often each family needs to be met with. So a very general triage system is push, pull, lift. Some families just need a little push. They maybe were in the work world, just need to get back out in there. They don't have any English language challenges. They don't have any major health or mental health challenges. They just need a little bit of assistance. That would be a push. Some families are pulls. Maybe they need some basic training. Maybe they need a GED. Maybe they need some more wraparound help. Those families take a little more energy, their pulls. And then lifts, these families have major barriers to employment. Maybe there are a lot of kids with challenges. Maybe there's a significant health or mental health challenge. This person has never been engaged in the work world, doesn't have a GED, et cetera, et cetera. So then you say, okay, so pushes, maybe I'll need to meet with them for every couple of weeks initially. And then once they're sort of launched and they're working and they're on their own, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's every 6 months. And then Pulls are a little more often, and lifts, maybe you need to work with them like once a week, at least at the beginning. There are some agencies out there that only actually have a sit down with their participants once a year, but they also have lots of other sort of, FaceTime or text or other, check-ins. I know there's an app out there, Compass has been developing where you can sort of do check-ins via an app so that the actual official meeting may only be once a year, but there's a lot of other sort of quick things in between. So it really depends on what the needs of your residents are. There's no one size fits all. I think minimally you need to meet with residents once a year because you need to have a progress report at least once a year. But otherwise, it's really going to be about what your families actually need. And on the flip side, don't meet just to meet. There was a housing authority I worked with a long time ago who said um, every FSS coordinator has to meet with every one of their clients at least once a month, or else how would we know that the FSS coordinators were doing their job? No, that's not a metric for a coordinator doing their job, right? That's meeting just to meet. So when you think about how often you need to meet with families, it has to be based on what their needs are, not sort of some arbitrary requirement that everybody must do. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that question. What if you do not have access to know how much is in the forfeited account? Well, as an FSS coordinator, you should know how much is in that forfeited account because it's your job to figure out how to get it back to the families who need it. So if you need, a letter saying that or supporting that, I'm happy to help send a message to the mailbox. Can the forfeited funds be given to a non-escrowing family? Are they an FSS? Are they in good standing? Yes. The answer is yes. Can FSS coordinators also do home ownership? Only if they are serving only FSS families or they're paid with outside funds. Okay. We participate in monthly interagency meetings. Can these serve as the PCC? Yes. So if you already have in your locality a group of service providers, it's basically the group of service providers that you would be pulling in to run to have be on your PCC, but they're already meeting all together for another purpose, like say the local United Way or something like that. Can you make that your PCC? Yes. The only thing is that you would need to bring residents as required by regulation, but that would actually be a very good idea as opposed to reconvening all the same people who are like, hey, I saw you last week. Why are we here again? We can't find a participant that the agency owes escrow to because they moved after completion. Should that funding be forfeited? Oof, that's a tough one. I would say document that you tried everything you possibly could to find that family. And then, yeah, I guess if you can't find them, it would go into the forfeited pot, but that's definitely a sticky situation. If the participant is working at the COP end date, but then loses their job during the time the coordinator is processing their graduation, are they still able to graduate? So this is a good question. The answer is yes, because the requirement is that they are working at the end of their COP. So their COP ends on 10/31 and they lose and you get together and you're like, yep, great, you've graduated, and then you don't get them the money until November 24th, and they lost their job on November 22nd, they've still graduated. Would an interim disbursement be allowed to stop an eviction, like to catch up on rent? Yes, if that's something that you allow it for. Again, I would be very, very careful. Generally, allowing interim disbursements for rent or utilities is not a great plan. I would, if it were me, I would want to make sure that that family had been engaged in financial coaching, had been doing some budgeting, that there was a plan for this, not to happen again. But if the choice is interim disbursement or eviction, yes, interim disbursement. Is an FSS coordinator required to keep the same office hours location as Section 8 office staff? No, absolutely not. In fact, it's a best practice that the FSS coordinator is out in the community for a good portion of their time, meeting with families wherever they are, at their job, in their home, at a local library, at another service provider, working with service providers to create and maintain those relationships. And then also, if I were running an FSS program and I had families that were working sort of a standard 9-to-5 job, I would have an FSS coordinator work some evenings and maybe even a Saturday, and then take other days, other time off, commensurate hours off at, maybe they come in late one day and stay late that day, or they work half day Saturdays and half days on Wednesdays, or whatever the case may be. But there's no requirement that you have to be in the office 9 to 5. And in fact, that's not generally a great plan. Are the Ross and FSS numbers ever combined for funding or for reporting? No. Okay. Please understand, so I'm seeing that there are several questions that are coming in a couple times. I still have 25 questions I haven't gotten to. So if you've put your question in there, trust me that I've seen it and I'm trying to get to it. Let's see. Once an FSS participant becomes a homeowner and still utilizes their voucher for homeownership, should the FSS record remain on their file as a current homeowner, or is there no need to transfer the FSS tracking with the homeownership move-in? So if they're on FSS, they purchase the home using the voucher homeownership option, they're still a voucher holder, so there wouldn't be any difference in how you track their FSS. Let's see. For FSS funds forfeited before the new rule, where do they go? So there's actually an FAQ on this in the FAQs that are online. Actually, there's an FAQ about a lot of this stuff, but any forfeiture that happened before June 16th, 2022 uses the old rules and goes back to OpFund or HAP, wherever it came from. Any forfeiture that happened after June 16th, 2022 uses the new rule and goes into the forfeited escrow account. Let's see. Is employment more important than education? For instance, if a person without a high school diploma has and maintains high earnings, can we remove the goal of graduating high school? This is totally up to the family and you and trying to figure out what that looks like. So I'll give you an example. My ex-husband, brilliant guy, went to a couple years of college, did not finish for whatever reason. It was really, really hard for him to get his foot in the door, kind of through his 20s and into his 30s, but he did. But not having that college degree was really a barrier. Since then, though, he's become the executive director of an organization, and pretty much now that he's in his mid-40s, he knows that getting a degree at this point won't actually help him with his future job prospects, because right now, pretty much everybody in his field sort of knows who he is. He has a reputation, and he's going to be able to continue to get work based on his work experience. And so he, at least at this point, has decided that he's not going to go back and get that college degree. The chances of that happening with a high school degree are much smaller, but it sounds like there is a situation here where somebody is doing very well. Well, not very, very well. Clearly, they're still in public housing. So I would look at the situation that they're in and figure out what is going to be the best angle, for this family. And just because they have a job now that is good, is that job sustainable? Are they going to be able to keep it? Are they going to need a high school diploma or a GED for their next job and their next move? are they possibly looking at college? They'll need a GED for that. So it really depends on the situation. And that's something that I would also, get your community college involved. Get the local one stop involved who's going to be able to help you look at kind of the career ladders in your area. Whatever this person is doing, they can help give you some input about whether a high school diploma is going to be critical or not. My guess is a high school diploma is probably, or GED is probably a non-negotiable for sustained employment, and employment that's going to be able to move a family out of needing public assistance, but talk to the family. Let's see. Is there a template to keep track of the forfeited account? We do not actually offer anything to keep track of the forfeited account. So that might be a great question for one of the peer mediated listservs to see if anybody is doing it that way. And here's my opportunity to plug. NARO has a peer mediated listserv. And Compass has what's called FSS Link, which has a discussion board. So both of them are free. I would recommend for some questions like this, or like, hey, does anybody have any, samples of a, I don't know, can you share your action plan? Do you have any needs assessments? What do you do in this situation? Those are great places to go with questions like that. So if folks from either NARO or Compass want to put those links in the chat, please do. And there's also links in the FAQ. Oh, good question. Can those funds, so I think this was the funds about like somebody graduated but then disappeared and you couldn't find them. Somebody said, can those funds be reported to the state as unclaimed funds? That's a great question. I don't even know what's involved with that, but great question. I don't know. If we work Saturday, would that be considered comp time, and does it have to be completed in the same pay period? That's totally a local, that's up to your agency. And we don't really get involved with that kind of HR. Can an HCV homeowner enroll in the FSS program? Yes. Yes, they can. I have a client with 7 large goals. Can I drop a goal without replacing it? Ask your FSS action plan about modification of goals. Okay. All right. I think we're going to switch to funding questions now. We have about half an hour. Please. So if it's not in your FSS action plan, change your plan. FSS action plans are eminently changeable. You can change them if like they really should be living documents, and you should be revisiting them at least once a year and saying, are these policies working for us? If they're not working for you and your participants, change them. That is why there's an FSS action plan and why so much of this is not in regulation, because it has to be what is going to work for the people that you are serving. So please, you can update your action plan as often as you want. It does have to be sent to your field office for approval. So like, don't make your field office grant manager mad at you by sending them something once a month, but like, I don't know, I'd say like once a year, maybe once every 6 months. But just know that they're living documents, and they should be re-examined. As you learn more, as you go to trainings, as you get more experience, as you know your population more, as material conditions in your community change, maybe you had a huge employer and the factory shut down, and that's going to need you're going to need to say, hey, we had some restrictions on what we were doing with interim escrow disbursements, and now families need it for this other thing. So like we should re-examine. So yeah, they're really meant to serve you and your program and your family the best possible way. There's a whole best practices guidebook that's available on HUD Exchange and on the FSS resources page. It's like 100 pages of best practices, and probably half of it are on policies in your FSS action plan. So, know better, do better, 100%. All right, I'm going to switch over to funding questions. We will be posting an FAQ on funding. I'm going to send it this afternoon to get posted. Hopefully it'll be posted tomorrow. I will bug them. If not, then the day after. And a lot of these will be in there, but I'm just going to kind of go down the questions that we had so far. So does every FSS program have to complete the funding yearly? The answer is, at least at this point, yes. If you are funded and want to continue to be funded for next year, you need to do this application now. So please, please be sure to get that in, if at all possible, by the priority deadline. Your funds that you currently have will run out December 31st. Our goal is to get you, if you get the application in by the funding priority deadline, our goal is to make those announcements about those funds by the end of the year, if at all possible. If we applied for another coordinator, when will we find out? When we make the announcement. So we'll make the announcements about renewal positions. Hope, like, for sure by the end of the year. We hope to make the announcements about expansion positions by the end of the year. If there's going to be a hiccup and for some reason we can't do the expansion positions yet, but we do know about the renewal positions, we might make an announcement just about the renewal positions first, but our goal is to make the whole announcement by the end of the year. Let's see. Jason, I don't know if you've been looking at these and have any sort of broad swath answers that you want to provide.
Sure.
Yeah, go
Um,
ahead.
okay. Well, thanks, Denise. Hey there, funding fans. I see a lot of questions that I think are actually answered in the notices or in the, well, we're about to post the FAQs. And so I would just say in general, there's a few situations that I think we can address here that are maybe sort of new, but please look at those documents first. And in general, we are on your side for this. We're not trying to, take your funding away. So, we are going to let you know if we haven't received an application. We're going to let you know if there's a problem with your application. Of course, we appreciate you all being proactive about it, but don't take no news to be bad news. We have to process all of these that are submitted. And so if you've done your job and submitted your application, you can sit tight and we'll let you know if there's any issues. And if for whatever reason we don't have it and you think you submitted it, we'll certainly let you know and say, hey, where's your application? And then you can let us know, hey, I thought I submitted it, and we can figure it out. Okay, looking at some of the questions in particular, we sent some emails out about self-certification reports. If you received one of those, we explained in there sort of the scenarios in which you would need to or would want to complete that. If you didn't receive one of those, then you don't need to submit it. There's a question about the renewal amount and the annual cost increase. The annual cost increase we put for this year by default is 4%. We know that that is not going to be the same across every agency and every place. So we fully expect you all to take that number and change it to whatever is appropriate in your area. The reason we publish that number is we use that as sort of one of the bases of our, reasonability calculation, right? So if you ask for an amount that is above 10% of that number, in addition to that number, then we're going to ask you like, hey, can you justify this? That's really what that number is there for. It's not to say you should just ask for whatever is in that column. And I hope the one message that has gotten through clearly is ask for what you actually need to pay the salary, fringe, including training and associated travel costs, membership in professional organizations for your positions. So regardless of the 4% that we put in that column, if you submit what you need and there's an explanation needed, we'll let you know. And if not, that's what we'll try to fund you for. Question about it's your first year of FSS. So um, basically, in order to get an additional coordinator, you would need 75 participants. We assume if you're a new program that you have 50 participants for your one coordinator. And that's one of the reasons that we sent out the self-certification report. If you want to let us know, actually, hey, I have 75 people, so I qualify for a second position, or, I have 125 people, I qualify for a third position, whatever that is. A couple specific questions, which if you have a specific question about your UBI or anything like that, please do email the FSS mailbox to let us know. That's the easiest way for us to address that.
So there was a question about how we use grant solutions, and the answer is that at this point, we are using grant solutions to accept applications from you, and then for you to accept funding. But that's pretty much all we use grant solutions for. I know there are other grant programs that use it to do all of your sort of like grant communication and all sorts of stuff. But basically, as long as you can submit your application and then your AOR can accept the money, that's what you'll need to be doing in grant solutions.
So the big shift this year is that we're not using grants.gov for FSS. So really, we're just moving that one piece of the process that used to be in grants.gov into Grant Solutions. So now everything in terms of the application and accepting the award, as NEC said, is in Grant Solutions. And then once you actually get the money, it goes into locks where you would access the funds. There's a question about how do annual raises work? In what possible way can FSS coordinator receive raises? However your agency sees fit, whatever, if you all have an annual schedule, if there's performance reviews that's based off of, if it's just based on time and grade or service, whatever it is, use that figure in what you request. So we don't tell you how to give raises. We encourage you to, but we don't tell you how to do it. That's entirely up to your agency. There's a question about the self-certification report, and so this is from Heidi. So yes, you are self-certifying, so you can give us your highest enrollment figure for those years that you listed. And also, if the information comes from whatever source that is verifiable, that you're certifying that this is the correct number. So we're gonna, until we have the ability to check that number against maybe a future data source, going to take you at your word. So just make sure that whatever number you send us is verifiable. And if for whatever reason your data system does not reflect that, or PIC does not reflect that, I would encourage you to work very quickly to ensure that it does. So there's a question about the mandatory documents for the application. So there's essentially 4 possible forms, right? There's the SF424, which is mandatory for everybody. There's the HUD 2880, which is mandatory for everybody. And in terms of mandatory forms, that's it. Now, there's 2 other forms that may apply. There's the SFLLL, which is if your organization does lobbying. If it doesn't apply, then you don't need to fill it out. And then there's the HUD 52651, which is needed in a few situations. One is if you're a multifamily applicant, the other is if you're a joint applicant, and the last one would be if you are asking for expansion positions. If one of those 3 things does not apply to you, you do not need to fill out the HUD 52651. So the vast majority of applicants will only need to submit the SF424 and the HUD 2880. However, we encourage you to consider whether you qualify for expansion positions, or, there's a reason why you would need to submit the HUD 52651, and also to ensure that if you do need to fill out the SFLLL, that you do. There's a question about ad hoc reports. I think we already addressed that. So is travel, yes, travel cost is for the associated training. So, that's what.
Just Real quick on that one, because I think there's a couple questions on this. Travel, like local travel, like mileage to go to and from homes of participants, that would be admin, that's not allowed. But if you are traveling as a part of the training, like airfare and hotel and food per diem, or, you know, if maybe you're going to your local, like your regional FSS roundtable and you're driving to a nearby city, that kind of mileage could be covered, but not like your standard mileage to go around to see participants. Two different things.
What is the number to call if we were having challenges with the application? Well, that depends. If you're having challenge accessing Grant Solutions, then I would encourage you to contact Grant Solutions with the contact information on their website. If you're having trouble just understanding what to do on the application, or you have a question about the funding table or the notices, you can always email fss@hud.gov. There's a question about, are we able to fill out the forms and upload them? So for the SF424, that is an online fillable form. For the HUD 52651, that is a Microsoft form. So there's a link to the Microsoft form for that. Unfortunately, the HUD 2880, you either have to print, sign, scan, upload, and submit, or do a signature digitally on the PDF.
I just put the FAQ on the 2880 in the chat. One thing I just want to tell everybody is that the answer to number 1 on the 2880 is yes for everyone. And the answer for number 2 on the 2880 is yes if you are requesting more than $200,000 for this application. Otherwise, the answer is no. And then if you answered no to either one of these, that's it. You just sign it and send it in. If you answered yes to question number 2, then all you have to, and if nothing else applies, then just put NA and sign it and send it in. And you can either sign it using, you can print it out, sign it with a pen, scan it, and upload it, or you can sign it electronically if you have that capability. It doesn't have to be like a DocuSign. You can just, paste in a signature if you have that capability. So yeah, just whatever's easiest for you is fine.
Okay, did I say that the HUD 52651 is needed for anyone applying for expansion positions? Yes. And the reason for that is that form asks you, how many positions are you applying for? Now, if we notice that you're asking for a lot more money, right, we're going to send an email to you and say, hey, we notice you're asking for a lot more money. It's above your maximum. Can you send us a justification? And then you might say something like, oh, well, I was requesting more positions. And we might say something like, great, can you go please fill out the 52651? So it's possible that that would get resolved anyway, but please do be proactive and fill out that form. I know if you have already submitted your application, you may not be able to access the link to that form. And if that's the case, please email us and we will give you a link to that. Yes, you won't see in Grant Solutions that the Microsoft form is filled out. It's 2 different systems, but encourage you, when you submit your Microsoft form, you can take a screenshot. Unfortunately, you won't get an email confirmation or anything. But if you really need to know, you can also email us to verify whether we've received it. But if you submitted it and you see the confirmation screen at the end, then you should be fine.
And just know, so unlike one of the reasons that we're not doing a NOFO and grants.gov is that we're able to be a lot more flexible doing it this way. So we really will, if you're missing anything, we will hunt you down to get it. Under kind of the old system is very like sort of hands-offish, and I know we had to send like cryptic messages and all this stuff. And our goal here is that 100% of the people who are eligible for renewal get their application in. The application is complete and correct. And we're going to do everything that we can to help you get there. you can help us by doing everything you can to get your applications in as soon as possible, so we're not chasing you down. But if you're missing something, we will let you know that it's not there. Now, if you intended to apply for expansion positions and you didn't apply for expansion positions, we're not going to know that that's what you wanted to do. So we won't hunt you down. But in terms of like, if you think you submitted your application, and then we don't see it and we know that you're eligible for a renewal, we're going to come find you.
So there's a question about the maximum funding, and generally we refer you to the notice, and it kind of gives a very complicated explanation. Part of the reason is don't worry about it. I mean, ask for what you actually need, and we'll let you know if it's over your maximum, and we'll ask you for the explanation. If you want to calculate it yourself, we kind of look at it in two different ways, right? One is we let you apply for 10% above, your renewal funding in the funding table, and we consider that to be reasonable. But the other thing is we also check it against your BLS, and that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for your area. And then we do the calculation where we add 40% to that, and then we add 10% to that. So, we'll give you the benefit of both of those calculations. So in the case that maybe you've been historically underfunded and you have a big jump, as long as it's reasonable with the BLS, we won't care. But again, ask for whatever you need. One of the problems that we often see is people just ask for the maximum. And I think I mentioned next year, we're going to basically reduce your future awards based on what you don't spend. And we're also going to optimize the size of your awards based on your historical spending. So it really doesn't benefit you in any way long term. It doesn't benefit anybody else, because ultimately that's money we can't give someone else to expand their program. So please just ask for what you actually need, and don't worry so much about the maximum. That's something we can worry about, and we'll let you know.
What admin fees are allowable under this grant cycle? None. We don't allow administrative costs under this grant. However, you have probably heard us talking about training. You can include in your calculations funds for training as part of the fringe benefits for the coordinator.
So there's a question about a change in your ED. That's very common. It should not actually change your SAM.gov registration or your UEI. So before you just go register for a new UEI and all of that, I would encourage you to see how you can actually take control of the existing one. But it's very common to have a change in executive directors. So typically that should not be an issue. There's a question of is everyone eligible for renewal this year? Well, not everyone. I mean, there's criteria for who's eligible, and generally we look at the last 3 years of your participant data to come up with your participant count. And, as long as you serve the minimum number of participants for at least a part-time position, which is 15, then you would be eligible for renewal. If you're going to lose positions or you're going to lose your program because you've been serving too few participants, that's one of the reasons that we would have sent you a self-certification form to let us know if that number is wrong for any reason. But if it's indeed correct and you're not serving enough people for that position, then it's not guaranteed that you would be renewed.
But also anyone who was first funded in 22 or 23, so the last 2 years, does not have to meet that minimum requirement, and so automatically has that eligibility. Still has to apply, but
Yes.
automatically has that eligibility.
And the funding table represents that, right? So that's where you can look to see what we have for you. There's a question. I've already applied for an expansion. So if you've already submitted your application, you want to modify it, just send us an email and let us know, and we can sort of return the application to you, and then you can modify it. So that's just fss@hud.gov. So the question about if there's a discrepancy in one of the past or prior years, is it amendable? I know there's a pick thing. Okay. So sort of modify your past data. We encourage you to make sure that your pick numbers are up to date. If, like I said, under the circumstance of either you're going to lose a position or a program, we're giving you an opportunity to let us know, to self-certify what your numbers are, including if you've attained enough people this year that you could maintain that position. We don't want to pull a position from you if you have brought the numbers up currently. So you would have received an email about that, but we're not going to credit expansion positions if the data that you have in pick is incorrect. We are aware for MTW expansion sites that there's an issue there, so we also are giving those folks an opportunity to submit a self-certification, but those are limited circumstances where that applies. Nancy, I don't know if you want to take this one. There's a question about, can we pay salaries for supervisors who do not carry a caseload?
Yeah, so when you get a salary, you get 40 hours a week, or whatever your full time for your agency is. Some agencies have 37 or 35 hours, but generally 40 hours a week. And you also have a list of FSS activities, right? And it's all the coaching stuff, but it also may be, administering the administration of all the files and keeping track. It may be reviewing participants for graduation and reviewing documentation. It may be working with partners, sort of all of those different things that are calculating escrows, all of those different things that are part of an FSS program. You have 40 hours and you have a list of work to do. You may decide how to split up those 40 hours amongst the staff at your agency. You could also outsource it, and that's fine too. But so basically, if you have a coordinator who's working 40 hours on the FSS program, and you want to pay them for 40 hours of work, then you don't have any money, or you don't have any hours left over to give to a supervisor. But say your coordinator or your coach only works 30 hours a week on FSS, because either they only work 30 hours a week or they get paid 10 hours a week from some other source. Then you have 10 hours a week left over, and you could give that to a supervisor for FSS activities. And you want to be really clear about, what does that mean? Does that mean you're doing group supervision of all of the coordinators? Does that mean you're reviewing and monitoring files? Does that mean that you're the primary person who's out working with partners and convening the PCC? That's fine. That can be a different person. But basically, you've got 40 hours and you've got a list of responsibilities, and it's up to you to divide them up. Hopefully that answers that question.
And I mean, just to be even clear about that specific question, I mean, in order to have somebody who's only doing supervisory tasks and doing no caseload, you would have to have a number of coordinators who are actually doing caseload work, right? So like, if you're funded for one position, obviously that person cannot be doing all supervisory tasks. There's nobody doing the caseload. You're funded for two positions, it also would not make sense, right? For you to have 50% of your coordinators doing supervisory work. So, I mean, you would have to have a large number of coordinators for that to make sense, for that person to be doing just the tasks that are allowed under the grant that are not casework.
So I see a couple of questions that are still about this, like, I can't see my grant in Grant Solutions. So I'll say again what we're saying to a lot of folks who have come in the mailbox. Anybody with a role assigned in Grant Solutions that is associated with your UEI should be able to see the renewal grant in Grant Solutions. So that's an AOR, which also has it's ADO, it's got another name too, a PIPD, or a staff support. Any of those people who have roles assigned in Grant Solutions associated with your UEI should be able to see the application in Grant Solutions. What we have found is that a lot of times the roles aren't actually assigned. And so for that, you would need to send a user request form to Grant Solutions. Just before this call, I actually got an email from a housing authority where I said, here's the UEI we have associated with your housing authority. And they said, that's not our UEI. So that's why they can't see the application. So we got to dig a little bit deeper into that. So that's your first stop. So make sure that the people who are looking in Grant Solutions have roles assigned in Grant Solutions. I can't tell you that. You would need to talk to help@grantsolutions.gov. They can help you.
You know, we're sort of at the top of the hour. Is there a cap on what coordinators can be paid? There is. There's a funding ceiling that's defined in the notice. It is a very high number.
I think it's almost $200,000.
And that's,
It's
inclusive of all fringe and whatever else, total compensation. But I will say, I haven't seen anybody approach that figure. So again, we'll let you know if you've exceeded that figure. That's one of the reasons that we'll reach back out to you. Well, just another plug that this is not your only chance to ask funding questions. In fact, you have several more chances. This Thursday, we have, or sorry, tomorrow, I guess, we have a question session at 2 o'clock. Next Thursday, we have one at 1 o'clock. And then I believe Tuesday, the 29th, we have one at 2 o'clock. So I would encourage you all, if you have more funding questions, to attend those sessions. You can, of course, reach out to fss@hud.gov, but please do go to the funding webpage. We're going to be updating it with some FAQs. Hopefully that'll help answer a lot of the questions folks are having. And, right as of now, we have about maybe a third of folks have applied for their funding. So the vast majority haven't. So if for whatever reason you're sitting on your application, it is very short and simple. We would encourage you to make sure that you get that in before November 1st.
All right. So I think we actually got to just about all of these questions. If we missed it, please come tomorrow or send a note to fss@hud.gov. We will be getting those FAQs up very soon. We also sent a note to our website folks to have the recordings of the last two Q&A sessions posted on the FSS funding page. So those should be up hopefully today or tomorrow. So yeah, read through all the resources that are available before asking the question. Go to go to Grant Solutions, help@grantsolutions.gov for any questions about assigning the AOR or assigning another role, finding the application in Grant Solutions. And then other questions come to the FSS mailbox at fss@hud.gov. So I think we are done. All right. I will tell you over 200 applications have already come in. I've heard from lots of people that once you actually get the application, it's really easy. Most folks are saying it takes less than an hour. It's 2 or 3 forms, very straightforward. So hopefully it will not be too daunting. And yeah, hope all the other questions that we talked about today made sense. Look at the FAQ document that's on the FSS resources page. And if you still have questions after that, shoot them to fss@hud.gov. And I will say I am getting the volume on the mailbox has about doubled in the last couple of weeks. So I'm still trying to get to everybody within 24 hours, but please give me a little grace if it takes a little more time. I will do my best. All righty. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.